View from the Gutters, episode 61. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Saga 1 through 18, and to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 1:13:26. Fucking done. Are you guys ready to record?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, let's do this.
I had my coffee.
What
I'm good to
episode
go.
is this?
This is 61.
This
All right.
is 61.
Episode 61. I'm Andrew Jard.
I'm Joe Preddy.
I'm Tobiah Panchin, and I've already had too much coffee.
Yay.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
You only had half that. It's a tiny little baby cup.
Yeah, it's like still half
Just because
full.
when
I've
you
had
get
maybe 4
coffees,
ounces.
you get the fucking giganto
That's true.
size.
I've been drinking coffee for quite a while.
What's your favorite? What's the size of coffee you get? 420 ounces?
I get an IV bag.
Yeah.
You get a 16-ounce quad shot.
I get a 20-ounce quad shot.
No, I've seen you get bigger coffees than 20 ounces.
No,
before.
that's because most places don't have a bigger one,
Yeah.
and if you go for 24, then the balance is wrong.
Well,
20 ounces with 4 shots of four shots of espresso and some water is perfect.
What's the there's that place across from OCC that you got the most giant coffee I've ever seen from.
Oh, that was a joke. Kirby offered that Kirby bought that for me. And being Kirby, she was like, "Go, just take the biggest coffee you've got."
It was like 32 ounces of coffee. Like
It was
24.
It was 24.
It was bigger than
I
that.
mean, really, what you
It's-
should just do is go to the 7-Eleven, get one of the 64-ounce Slurpee
Oh
cups,
Jesus!
and
No.
then take that to the
Oh,
coffee
God, no.
shop
Oh,
and say,
good
fill this
Lord.
to the top.
No, that's
I-
too much. Even I have limits.
It's,
I mean, espresso is not as strong as a medium or light roast cup of coffee. Like a light
I
roast
don't
cup
think
of
that's
coffee.
accurate.
That is absolutely accurate.
Well, I know that blonde roast, light roasts have
Have
a
more
lot
caffeine,
more caffeine.
yeah.
That's why
So
I
a
get
cup
them,
of coffee, a shot of espresso is equivalent to like a dark roasted cup of coffee.
Yeah,
pretty
but
much.
you're
It's
having
got the-
4 shots, and I'm
Yeah,
having
but-
one 16-ounce coffee.
Welcome
that's the
to
same-
coffee hour.
Yeah,
It's the same amount of caffeine
Coffee
as
talk.
2 like
Let's put it this
blonde
way.
roasts.
The amount of caffeine that Joe can ingest could literally kill me.
Yeah, I don't.
When I worked at Mervin's doing loss prevention, I would drink 2 or 3 of those a day. So like
Jesus
one a day
Christ.
is nothing.
I have 1 cup of black tea a day, and that's it. If I
But,
have other caffeine than that, I get like way strung out.
I also should say that I have big time adult ADD and it's
Yeah.
self-medicating. So
Yeah.
because when I have that coffee for a couple hours afterwards, I can actually get something done. And then it's just all back to like
Yeah.
Looney Tunes in my head and you
Yeah,
know.
I have the same thing. I just have to like constant stream of caffeine.
Was that
throughout
a
the day.
Simpsons reference?
I'm not intentionally.
Okay, there's one moment where it goes like inside Homer's head, and it's just like Looney Tunes, and they're like sawing on a fiddle and stomping on the ground.
Yeah, it's
Old timey
it's,
jug band.
It's what I imagine the inside of your head is like.
it's somewhere in
Same.
between Homer and Bart, depending on whether or not I'm hungry.
Yeah, it's like a mix between like Looney Tunes stuff happening in your head, and then sometimes the Frank book slips in, and there's like weird amorphous,
It's very similar to that. The way I like
symmetrical floating things.
my brain when I'm medicated or on a good amount of caffeine, it's like New York. It's a grid. Everything works very well. My brain without caffeine is much more like London or Paris, which is much more like, nah, this thing that's okay. We'll go here and
Sweden. Is that city in Sweden? Is it more like that?
Yeah,
Stop pandering to our New York listeners, Joe.
forget about it.
we were looking at the web stats before
Yeah.
we started recording, and the number 1 city for visits to our website is Olympia.
It's our
'cause
hometown.
where we're from. Number 2 is this town in Sweden.
Yeah.
It's like Orander or
It's Orebro.
Orebro.
It's
That's it.
Orebro. However you would pronounce that
So
in Swedish.
hello to our northern friends.
Yeah, I love Sweden, so
Well, apparently that one town in Sweden really likes us.
if you guys have a Comic-Con that you want us to go to,
Well,
let
we'll
us
totally
know.
go.
We'll go.
And you're willing to pay for our flights and lodging?
No, I'll go.
Then yes.
I'll go without that. I want to go to Sweden bad.
I'll take a boat.
There's one
If
in
you
December.
give me enough
You're going to get on
warning
the
to
steam
save
trawler
up money,
tomorrow.
I'll
Yep.
hit that up.
Yeah, let's do it, kid.
So what are we talking about?
We are talking about Saga.
Saga.
It has been a long week.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
God, yeah.
we got back from New York, or
Emerald City.
from New York City, from Emerald City Comic Con yesterday.
Which was great.
It's
You guys
awesome.
made a good episode about it. I'm
Yeah,
sorry I couldn't be on it.
If you haven't listened to our episode, the wrap up, we put that out
The
this
con
week.
report.
So yeah, that was on our Back Matter episode 3. So go listen to that if you care about Comic Con. It was a good episode, and this episode is about Saga. We're talking about the first 3 trades, which is the first 18 issues.
And you
everything
pitched
that come out. I did
Saga. So why don't you start us off?
Well, I reread part of it again this week to prepare for the show. I like to reread everything right before, but it was a busy week, so I didn't get to reread all of it. But I've read it recently enough that I'm pretty familiar with it. The one thing that I was noticing about it this time was how much it reminded me of the first time that I really got attracted to the Star Wars universe. Like how I was able to relate so easily to this universe because it introduces it to you through so few characters. Something I'll joke about now about the Star Wars universe is that the universe only has 8 people in it because every single Star Wars story is either like a descendant of that person or like one of those 8 people. And like, I find that, I joke about that.
And there's literally only one girl in the entire galaxy.
Man, there's 2. There's Mara Jade. Don't forget about her. Extended canon.
No, I didn't forget about Mara Jade. No, I'm just joking.
But
Extended universe doesn't count.
That's fair.
It's out of continuity.
That's fair. And the first 3 didn't happen. So yeah, there's one girl. And they cut out those female pilots out of Return of the Jedi. Those dickheads. Anyway, this reminded me a lot of that, where it's a huge universe. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to comprehend about the universe, but it introduces it to you in a way that's feels very streamlined because you're introduced to it through 2 characters first that have a baby that run into another character that then you get these cutaways to like the evil empire, and you're introduced to the Prince TV head the 4th or
Prince
whatever.
Robot. They're all named Robot.
Robot the 4th.
Prince Robot, Count Robot, Duke Robot.
Yeah,
they're all Robot.
Countess Robot, Princess
I'm
Robot.
in love with the robot.
it's Robot the 4th, right? The first
Yeah,
one.
Prince Robot the 4th.
And
technically, he's the second one you meet because the first one is the guy who attacks them in the garage at the very beginning.
Oh, that's right.
And he gets killed.
I forgot about that. But the cutaway, the flash,
Yeah.
the cut to the evil empire is basically told to you through that Prince Robot. And so you meet him, and you're like, okay, this is part of that empire. You're introduced to the home world and the moon, which is why they call them Moonies, which I never picked up the first time. I don't know why. And then, it does a really good job of just kind of easing you into it. And then you meet the bounty hunters, which they call them freelancers in this, but they're essentially bounty hunters, which is something that a lot of people really love about the Star Wars universe, me included.
And I love the little conceit with their names.
Yeah.
Where, like, it's not Mr. or Mrs., it's the.
Yeah.
The Will, the Stock,
Yeah.
the brand.
Yeah. I love that.
I just think that's a cool little touch. Like, it doesn't do anything. It's not a joke exactly, except for the fact that the Will's name actually is Will.
Yeah.
When I think the other ones, they all have aliases, and he's the Will.
Yeah.
I just want.
It's a little joke, but
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it just makes it cooler.
Yeah, and just the way that you meet him first, and he's like, "Oh, the stock's on the case," and he's like, "Oh, well, fuck that! I'm not taking this case. If she's on the case, they're already dead." Or if that, well, they don't even say she at first. They're like, if that asshole's on the case, then they're already dead. I love the amount of like foreshadowing. It's not really foreshadowing. It's a little bit of foreshadowing.
It's the
but
build.
Just like, the build, and just like saying these great things that would be good cliffhangers at the end of TV shows. Like, oh, if that asshole's after him, they're already dead. And then it's like, bump, bump. And then next episode, like there are these great moments that get you really... They're building the tension of the universe, and the character designs I find to be really outstanding too. I love the Lion Cat. The Lion Cat is what it kind of draws me in the way the Star Wars universe did with its alien species. Where I was like, oh
My
there's
God, there
other
was so
crazy
much
shit going on.
freak out and butthurt
Oh, yeah.
when it looked like the Lion Cat might be dying.
Oh,
There was
yeah.
issue 11. I remember that because he was like, "I'm sorry." Like, you're not sorry.
I liked
Yeah.
that the little girl always referred to him as Honest Cat instead of
Yeah.
Lion Cat.
Yeah, which was another good touch.
The little
Yeah.
girl is a fantastic character in
Oh,
the
yeah.
series. Like, the scene that... This series is also very sad. Like it like has some gut punch moments for me that like
It
I never see coming.
It didn't really strike me as sad personally. Like there's a lot of emotion that's going on, but I never really felt sad.
The medic squirrel,
I felt sorry for.
that punches me right in the gut.
She was squirrel or mouse? She
It's
was
like
some kind of
is an alien,
she was some kind
but
of like
they look kind of squirrel.
yeah.
An
That
alien
was kind of
rodent.
awful.
I'm
that
gonna try and find it.
punched me right in the gut because that you don't see that coming. You know,
No,
you're
no.
not attached to that character at all. You're never like, oh, look at how cool this character is. We're gonna build it up and build it up and build it up. It's just kind of this thing like, oh, that's a cool character, and then immediately they're like, no, shit has gone
Yeah.
horribly wrong.
Well,
I don't enjoy
yeah.
this. The lion cat when when the girl is saying like, "Oh, I'm dirty on the inside because I had to do stuff
she
with those
starts
men,"
to say it.
and then he's like lying, like to reassure her. They're like, "No, you didn't do anything. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Like that really like touches me.
See, I didn't know if he was saying lying to that or lying to the way she worded it that they forced me to.
No, because she
No,
smiles
she's-
afterwards.
Oh,
She's saying that she's dirty because of the things that she's done, and he's going, no.
The medic was
Yeah.
a mouse. No,
Man, that's
Okay.
what it was. Sorry, it was a mouse. But yeah, she smiles afterward because the lion cat has
Yeah.
comforted her.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it's like that was something that really attracted me to the lion cat as a character.
The
Will's-
lion cat is my favorite character.
Yeah, the
hands
Will's
down.
reaction to the Stock's death was like such a good moment in the book for me. Like, there's just like the emotion that comes through in these characters I find really appealing, and it doesn't feel like they're forcing you to feel the emotions. I feel like I'm feeling them naturally, which is either because I am feeling them naturally, or because they're such a good writer that they've tricked me into feeling it without me noticing that I've been tricked.
This is one of those books that reminds me that when Brian K. Vaughan really puts his mind to something, he can be a master storyteller. And
Yeah.
especially when he's collaborating with Fiona Staples.
Yeah.
This is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite books coming out right now, if not my favorite.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I can't
Actually-
wait for the next trade.
I consider it a sign that something is well written when I realize that I'm reading characters with a particular voice, and I'm like, whose voice is that I'm reading this in? And I have to think about it a minute and go, oh, okay, it's this voice. That's what I'm doing. Because normally, like, I don't read text in a comic book or in a book with like a particular voice behind it. It's just like my in my head voice, unless it's like really good and I'm really into it. And there were a bunch of characters that I was reading with a very particular voice in this work.
Absolutely.
Like, there's the dialogue in this is really, really good. I think it's one of Brian K. Vaughan's particular strengths as a writer is that he does good dialogue that feels natural, and every character feels like they have a voice of their own.
Well,
Yeah.
and the way that his sentences flow, it's very realistic. Like,
Yeah.
these are things that you can see somebody saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we have the term Bendis speak, but we don't have the term Vaughn speak.
Well, and it's funny too because they aren't realistic. They're saying like the outlandish, ridiculous things about a universe that we've never seen, but it's so relatable because of the way that it's like, you know, set up on the page and delivered. Essentially, it's like, oh, it just flows so well. It feels natural.
I guess
even
what
though
I
it's
mean is
alien.
that you can see the human emotion in it, and you know that, like, if you and your friends were in this situation, this is what you would sound like.
Yeah, they feel like realistic reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there's always, for me, been this kind of weird conflict in my mind about this series. And I feel like I understand it so much better now, having reread the first 18 issues as a single piece. So one of the main kind of center points of the story is this book that Alana read that was written by Oswald Heist,
Right.
which is, by all accounts, like this very, very boring, ordinary, down-to-earth book where they hang out and play board games and go get sandwiches. And, like, it's very down-to-earth and real life, but they talk about things that are incredibly important and address kind of the existential conflict of living in a society that is in a constant state of war, but which has exported that war to everywhere else except where they are.
Right.
And I think that Saga as a comic mirrors that conflict, because when you actually look at what they're doing on the page, a lot of it is very ordinary stuff. They're doing laundry and changing diapers and talking about their childhoods and just kind of living ordinary life in a way that a lot of comic book characters do not do.
Yeah.
And I think that on a certain level, this comic itself, in addition to the book within the comic, is addressing the idea of the way in which living in a state of constant warfare, especially exported warfare, like it emotionally twists you and twists the way that you think about the world, which is a very salient metaphor for living in contemporary America.
Yeah, it's easy to... I mean, like, that was one of the first things that had stuck in the first issue that I had missed kind of the first time reading this, was there's that quote basically about how once the war was exported, most of the citizens forgot they were even fighting a war, let alone care about why it was still going on.
Right, and I think one of the secret metaphors of this, or I guess not metaphor, but kind of story beats, messages, is that they might have forgotten that they're at war, but it still affects them on an emotional level. And I was talking about Joe with this afternoon, and we were talking about when Gwendolyn busts in and kills Heist. And it's kind of this automatic reaction, like she wasn't really thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that that was intentionally done because she has lived her entire life in a society that sees half the galaxy as these enemies who are an existential threat to their very existence. And so when she sees somebody that she's not certain about, like, is he a friend or is he a foe, she automatically launches to, I'm going to lance this guy in the face.
Yeah.
That is her automatic reaction, where if she had lived in a more peaceful society, she may not have done that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the opposite of the early Walking Dead issues to me, where it's like they're not used to living in this like super kind of war-torn dystopia, and they're a lot more trusting of people that walk along, and they get burned by that. By being like, oh, I'll help you. This can't possibly go wrong. We're all people. We're all in this together. And they're adapting to a world that is very much like a survivalist community, a warlike community. And then later issues, and I'm not totally caught up on Walking Dead, but like you see the change in the characters as they become more like the characters in this book, where they're like, the first reaction is to violence. The first reaction is to distrust, because they live in a universe that like built that in. This was the quote I was looking for, though. It was, some of the locals never stopped thinking about the battles being waged in their names on distant soils. Most didn't really give a shit. And I was like, that really hit me this time, where it didn't really the first time. But I think that this book is, what it does really well is kind of take away the romance of a war story, because so many times violence and war and conflict can be romanticized, and I think that's not a good thing. Like I don't know that I can totally 100% call myself a pacifist, but I definitely think that war is for the most part unnecessary and kind of I think it's wrong.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
About that quote you just read, I saw a lot of parallels between that quote and the war in Iraq.
Oh, absolutely.
When half the people that you would talk to back then didn't give a shit what was going on. They didn't, read news about it or anything like that, because it's not happening here.
Absolutely.
And it's like some foreign thing going on. I mean, literally a foreign thing going on, but...
Yeah. Well, there was jokes in Arrested Development about it too, where it was like Lindsay, her stylist has to go to war, and she like is oblivious to the fact that there's a war going on, and there were tons of people that were like that. They're just like they didn't even know that it was still going, because what was it, 2 years after we went, the Bush is on the fucking the aircraft carrier going, mission accomplished, and it's like. Yeah. We still have troops there.
Like this is a really good, fun series just in and of itself, but it is also a really strong allegory for modern day America and the way that we relate to a war that the vast majority of the population is not actively involved in any way.
Yeah, you think back to like World War II, and it was like, oh, we were rationing metal, we were rationing gas, we didn't have a lot of chocolate. That's when like they started to do a lot more like milk chocolate and stuff, where it was like watered down chocolate essentially, because We didn't have chocolate. That was all going to the troops. Cigarettes were all going to the troops. Cigarettes became more expensive. Like, people were growing war gardens in their front lawn because it was cheaper than going to the store and buying vegetables. And, like, tinned food, like canned food, got really expensive because it was all going to the war front. Like, it had a major effect on people living in America. Like, you had to make cutbacks. My grandpa talks about, or when he was alive, he talked about, he lived in California, and something that they would do was go out and take these, like, flashcards of Japanese fighter planes and, like, look through them. And anytime a fighter plane would fly over, they would, like, try to identify it. And that was just something they did as, like, part of their community, to, like, sound the air raid siren if they saw Japanese planes.
There was an interesting story I heard one time that the prostitutes in France would draw a line up the back of their leg to make it look like the seam of nylons.
Yeah,
but, which they weren't wearing.
Well,
because
all the nylon, like, they did that here too,
too,
because all the nylon went to parachutes. So American women would do that too.
My grandma talked about that too, and she, to my knowledge, was not a prostitute. But
the story that I heard was in the context of French prostitutes, but I'm sure it was a wider thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There were so many cutbacks in the U.S. and, like, then we went to war in Iraq in 2001, 2002. When we officially were in there.
It was 2003. I think that we officially went. Afghanistan started like a month later. That was 2001. It was like November 2001. Iraq didn't start until like 15 months later. It was early 2003. And like 3 months after that, they were like, mission accomplished. We're done.
Yeah. And we didn't have any of those setbacks or regulations this time when we went to war. There was no, like, there's like a huge gas shortage or a huge metal shortage or a huge, everyone's now growing war gardens in their front. Like, none of that happened this time. It was so much more of a distant thing that didn't affect you. Like, I don't know if the price of anything went up, but if it did, nobody really seemed to know.
Well, I think at that time we had a lot higher military budget than we did.
Well, that's the thing, is that they increased the military budget to fight World War II, and then they never brought it down.
Exactly.
That's the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about.
Well, yeah, there's a great
so
documentary.
It didn't really affect us money and product.
It did.
Wise.
They just racked up like $1 trillion of debt. To pay
okay, well, yes. What I'm saying is it didn't affect the American
it didn't affect
people.
the day-to-day lives.
Exactly, and that's what I mean, is that it's what makes it feel so distant and so foreign is, like, if it doesn't affect me directly, like if we had gone, if we'd taken a vote to go to war, which we obviously didn't do, but if we had done that and it was like, oh, it won't affect you at all, everything will be the same price, like obviously people would be like, oh, well, sure, I guess. But if it had been like, yeah, but you can't get half of these goods and services, like you won't be able to drive anywhere, people would be a lot less willing to go to war,
right? And I think that's a large part of the commentary of this book, is that they're going like, we live in a country today where it's like we can go off to war and it doesn't affect you at all. And there's a lot of people out there who are like, yeah, let's bomb them all, let's go and take their countries, and just they feel absolutely no compunction about going to war because they don't think that it costs them anything.
Right.
And this book is saying, yes, it does. It costs you your soul.
Well,
And I want to read a quote, too.
Yeah, do it.
Towards the end of Volume 1, because I was reading the trade, whatever issue that is, probably issue 6. The guy says, when a man carries an instrument of violence, he'll always find the justification to use it. If we really want to escape this war, we have to stop bringing it with us.
Yeah.
Marko says that.
Right before he breaks his sword.
Yeah, right before he breaks the sword. And I think that that's part of a larger allegory about, as long as you are ready to go to war, you'll always find, as long as you have the military budget, as long as you're constantly on a war footing, you will find the justification to use that thing.
Right.
Because otherwise it would be a huge waste of time. You have to justify it.
Exactly. I find what you were talking about earlier, that just how the book is so much about the day-to-day life of these people, and they're doing laundry and they're hanging out and they're talking and they're traveling through space, and just how mundane the book can be at some points really highlights the fact that even your day-to-day life is affected by the fact that these had both been soldiers.
Yeah.
Like, their life goal is not, let's, end the war, or let's stop conflict, or let's, like, they don't have they're not going to save the universe. This book isn't about saving the universe. This book is about saving their kid from a war-torn universe, and just like, can we escape it? And the message that they cannot escape the war, I think is a strong one. I think it backs up what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, it will devour everything.
Okay, so at this point, Joe has been abnormally quiet. And so I want to hear what his thoughts are, because I know when I'm abnormally quiet for this long, it means I got something to say.
Joe fell asleep.
I did fall asleep. No, I was kind of listening to you guys talk about it. I got into Saga pretty early on, like right around the time the first trade came out, because I can't remember where it was, but I think it might have been on Reddit. And somebody had said, I'd read praise about it, but they were like, it's really cool that somebody's doing a comic that the main premise of which is a love story. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, that's an interesting enough premise to me to get me to check it out. So I read it and I really liked it. As somebody who's had problems with, I had a really hard time getting into Y the Last Man. Once I did, I enjoyed it until the end, and the end is, and I'll be willing to say it's just me or whatever, but I hate the ending.
You were not satisfied.
I was the opposite of satisfied with the ending of Y the Last Man.
I think there are a lot of people in your camp on that.
Yeah, and I mean,
definitely found it unsatisfying.
I didn't care for it, and I also think that while it got better as the series went on, there were a few. Brian K. Vaughan had trouble writing women at certain points in that, and I think it may be. Though I was talking about this with Toby earlier a little bit, just to kind of, solidify some of my own thoughts. It reminded me, and much more in Y the Last Man, the way that when I read Preacher, Garth Ennis wrote Jesse Custer as not as an American, but as a European thinks Europeans talk and act. And because they're basing it on shit like John Wayne and Chuck Norris.
You mean Europeans think Americans?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all good.
And in the beginning of Y the Last Man, and it's like I said, it's a problem that gets better as it goes on. I feel that he runs into that a little bit. In Saga, the thing I was most impressed with, at least in the initial 6 issues, was that problem was not a problem anymore. Like, this is, I think, some of the best writing Brian K. Vaughan that I've read of his.
Yeah.
I think occasionally Alana will say something I'm like, it feels a little overthought to me, but it's not to the point where I'm like, problem. It's just kind of like, maybe you could have gone a little, not softer, but maybe something a little less harsh,
Like in what scenarios is she dealing with? Like,
there's a point at which, let me think of a specific instance. There's a couple of instances. The first one that comes to mind is, it's probably because it was towards the end of the book, but when Marko comes out of the lighthouse and she's like,
I knew you were going to talk about
yeah, and it's just like, it's not that scene. Like, I think, clearly, like, they've had a baby, right? And as somebody that has lived through infancy, having the infancy of a child, it's like when you finally get that night where the baby is asleep and you haven't been with your significant other because of issues with pushing something the size of a watermelon out of something the size of a lemon, right? You're like on that shit, right? So that wasn't what I had the problem with. The dialogue just felt a little forced, not like majorly forced, but just like, I feel like there may have been a way that she would have said it that would have sounded a little more right.
I think that you're splitting the difference between realistic dialogue and realistic sounding dialogue.
No, and that's not at all.
What I mean is that when you're writing dialogue, you don't necessarily write the way that people actually talk. Like, people don't stutter and stammer and say or start talking and say, oh, well, I meant to say something else in a book. Like, they just speak very clearly and to the point and make poetic sounding statements.
Right, and that's not at all what I mean. That's not even in the ballpark of what I mean. Okay. I'm talking about dialogue that feels appropriate to a character.
But the dialogue is what defines the character, though. Like,
and that's
every piece of dialogue that they say is not uncharacteristic.
Well, and that's not necessarily what I mean either. I mean that I feel like he is fleshing out this character of Alana. That she's very like she's fucking. She's not like. He's doing a very good job of avoiding the tropes that I think a lot of men who write women like to put it, like, she's not the hardcore bitch that speaks her mind, and no, she doesn't need no man, and blah. He's avoiding, like, she's just a character that's very forthright. She says exactly what's on her mind, and she says it the way she thinks it.
Well, they're very honest with each other.
Yeah, and I like that.
That's refreshing.
And I feel like sometimes though he's like almost pushing that just a little too much, is what I'm trying to say.
She's too honest.
I didn't necessarily feel that, but part of it, I think, is because Alana reminded me exactly of my friend Laura, who not only looks a bit like her, but talks and thinks almost exactly like this woman.
And has wings.
And has wings.
And I mean, I think maybe she does. It's crazy.
It's weird.
I think maybe it's... And you know what? I would even be willing to say that it might just be something that resonates with me a little bit. Like, I don't think it's a bad enough thing to be like, oh, that's just shit. He's totally missing the point. Like, one of the thing I love the most about this is that I feel that Marko and Alana are fully realized characters. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're telling a story like this, if you can't fucking do that, then you failed right out of the gate. You should just give up. Because if I'm not connecting with those two characters, then I don't give a shit what they're going through or what their world is going through. And Marko and Alana, they get it. Now they feel, as somebody who's been like a young parent, it feels like that. They're not fucking like they're taking the piss out of this romantic idea of like having a baby is a beautiful, wonderful experience. No, it's fucking disgusting having a baby.
I
right?
like the beginning of the book opens with them having a baby because you learn a lot about their relationship through
absolutely.
their dialogue during the childbirth and after the childbirth.
Yeah.
Where my favorite line is when he's like, "Oh, we're in this world, like." We don't have to think for ourselves anymore. Like, we have a greater purpose now. Like, we have to, provide for our kid. And she's like, oh, fuck that. Like, those are the words of a quitter. Like, we don't have to give up on what we
have
love
a family
just
to think
because
of
we
now.
have a family. Yeah, just we have a family to think about now. Yeah.
And actually, I want to go back to the comment that you made that you felt the Alana's dialogue when they were coming out of the lighthouse was something that you felt was didn't fit with the character.
Yeah.
And I feel like that harkens back to the conversation they had when Hazel was conceived, where he's like, you told me to do this. And she's like, that was sexy, Alana.
Yeah.
You can't trust her. That bitch is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And there's actually another scene here. And I'm talking about this is going to bring out my inner 14-year-old boy. But when she says, shoot it in, when he's like, you said, I think your exact words were like, shoot it in my twat. I'm like, twat is not the fucking word she would have used, sexy Alana or not. She would have used the C word, and I can't fucking say the C word because...
No, I think that...
I'll say it. It's cunt.
Okay, all right, cunt. Yeah. That's what she would have said.
I think that twat is exactly the word that she would have used because it's not the word that you would expect, and she does not say the thing that you expect.
I think the reason I don't feel that is because twat is in no way, shape, or form a sexy word in any way.
Maybe not in this galaxy.
That's true. I mean, that's true. Maybe twat is like the height of dirty talk in their galaxy.
I like the word twat.
I do too. I'm glad usually when I'm calling somebody else it, I won't say who.
I mean, I'm glad they didn't use any number of other words.
I know, and that's the thing. Like,
this is not disgusting.
It's not something that needs to be defended because it's not a problem that's big enough to warrant like a huge discussion, right? It's just a gut feeling I have, right? I feel like at certain times, and you get this when you want to get a character so badly, when you want to get them right so badly, sometimes you're a little too close and you overthink it a little bit.
Well, and I also think that maybe it's the strength of his writing that you feel like this character has a very specific voice to the point where it's like, the writer isn't doing this character right. Like, you have such a clear conception of who she is in your head that you're arguing with the creator of that character as to what she would and would not say.
Because she's been so well fleshed out, these random points, it happens like 2 or 3 times, where I'm like, I just don't feel she would have used that word. I feel like she would have said something else, right?
And having been where you are in terms of this thing happened and it didn't feel right to me, and now I don't like that element of this. I feel you.
Yeah, and it's
but
not
I
even...
also feel like maybe this is a personal thing for you.
And it very well could be. Like, and it's because it's not even a bad enough thing to make me go, fuck this, I'm not going to read it. Like, it's just, if I had a word for Brian K. Vaughan in this context, it'd just be like, relax, you're getting it. Or you don't have, just, it's cool. There's only one thing that concerns me about this, and I've been thinking about how to put this. We have 3 major arcs, and in each one a character dies. I understand that there could be any one of a number of justifications for that, and so far it's not a problem. I have a problem if it becomes a pattern. If in the next, because then I start looking for people to die. And
well, more than 3 people die. I think that and I understand what you're saying. Like, if it does become a pattern, if like in the 4th arc, like another major character dies, and then another and I get it, but this is a world where violence is the first reaction.
And this was exactly Toby's response. Yeah. And my response to it was this. I don't expect, this is not, I'm overly emotionally attached to characters. No, this is me going, and I used Game of Thrones because I think it's an excellent example, and there are going to be spoilers in this. So for some reason you don't know what happens in the first season of Game of Thrones, then I can't help you.
Spoiler alert.
Well, you can, instead of saying character's name, you can just say a major character.
When the major character from the first season meets his untimely end, that blows your mind, right? Because that's not something that is traditionally happen in that fiction. And from that point on, you know what the stakes are.
Right.
But what makes them so gut-punchy is the fact that they happen at random intervals.
Right.
Like, you don't know what's coming. And so the problem is not that they die, it's that it seems very consistent that one arc, one major death, one arc, one major death.
At the end, or...
Well, just where... Because, it always seems to happen near the end.
Yeah, so if, the 4th arc opened with a character dying, that
then
would
maybe,
that be...
that I would... Or even if you went through an arc where nobody... Because, the thing is when the lion cat gets sucked out into space, I was holding my breath.
Yeah.
And I want to keep on doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to be, reading and being like, oh, well...
Yeah, exactly.
That's the character that's going to die in this arc, because that's the way my brain works. I can't shut it off.
And the argument that I made to you was, if I walk into a Shakespearean tragedy, I know for a fact that everyone's going to die.
This is true.
Everyone is going to die. And it's not necessarily that it happens, but how it happens.
I agree with that, too. But I also think that when Gwendolyn kills Oswald
Height.
Yeah.
He, that happens so quickly. There's no setup for that. There's no, anticipation of, this is the character that's going to die. And, I found it to be really refreshing because it was just, you didn't know it was going to happen.
See,
I thought it was going to be the mom.
Right.
And then, next scene, bam, he's the one that's dead. And
right.
I actually was...
Shit.
I mean...
we know that it's not going to be the mom because Hazel told us, or the grandmother... We know that Hazel told us that she and her grandmother returned to her homeworld.
Yeah.
In one of the flashbacks, Hazel says, my mom never returned to the world of my birth, or the world of her birth, although my grandmother and I did.
Oh, yeah.
Or something to that effect.
Well, yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
It's not... And my response to that is that, yes, I do know that. But a Shakespearean tragedy isn't serialized over years.
And I don't feel that necessarily makes a difference to me.
Well, yeah, and it may not to you, but it makes a hell of a big difference to me.
Well, and to be honest, this is one of the major problems I have with comic books in general. Is it's not the serial nature of comics isn't built into the way that stories are told. That's not necessarily how sequential art stories have to work.
No, absolutely.
That's based solely on the fact that we have this weird arcane distribution method that's left over from magazines.
Absolutely.
In a reality in which you could release just original graphic novel series or the entire series complete, the way that they do with TV shows on Netflix now, it's it doesn't matter that Arrested Development season 4 has episodes, because your intention is to watch the whole thing. You know?
And
like, it
that's
is one piece of fiction. Right?
And this gets to my point entirely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that this is his world.
Yeah.
These are his characters. There is no reason that he needs to shackle himself to any one formula. And
I agree.
That is my concern, is that he's going to shackle himself to this kind of 6-issue arc with a major character dying in each arc, and that would not be satisfying to me. There's no reason he needs to tell these stories chronologically.
Yeah.
There's no reason he needs to tell them in any kind of linear order, because it's his fucking universe. If he wants to jump in a few months when he comes back and tell, 6 issues or 12 issues of Hazel as a toddler, and then all of a sudden she's a teenager, and then she's filling in some time there.
I think that we've seen that is kind of going to be the pattern, because the last page of the 18th issue, she's walking. Like, time has passed. A lot of time has passed.
Absolutely.
And I think that to get to the point in which she will be an adult at the end of the series, like, obviously things are going to speed up and slow down over time. It's going to be like, skip a couple years.
He also says at the end of the thing, at the end of issue 18, he says, okay, so we're jumping 3 months into the future now.
Well, no, that's
where the
he's
19
talking
is
about
start.
real time at the end of the he's talking about
she's
they're on the
several
hiatus.
years old in the. I mean, she's.
Oh yeah, not 3 months. But he said that 19 is going to start her toddler.
Yeah.
She's going to be walking. Like, we skipped a bunch of the stuff, which is okay.
But beyond that, Hazel is the one who is telling us the story.
Yeah.
It's narrated by her.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we know that, like, this is something that she is communicating to somebody, retroactively. Like, this is the story of my life.
Also,
so, like, we get bits and pieces from the future, like the fact that she and her grandmother are together after her mom, like, dies. So presumably Alana could very well die at some point in this series. Like, that is something that has been potentially foreshadowed.
There's also the line about how she at one point suffered a broken heart, and it's like, so we know that Hazel has a romantic plot line in the future.
Yeah.
Whether we'll see that or not, we don't know.
Isabel was the first of her nannies.
Right.
And we know that Isabel will be, like, with her, like, they're soul bonded or whatever. And Isabel said, like, it's only going to hurt her on the day that it ends.
Right.
So presumably that relationship is going to end at some point, and that's going to be a very painful moment for her.
Yeah, and I also like how much of the story is not narrated by Hazel. Like, how much we're getting glimpses of the rest of the universe that isn't from a limited narrator's perspective. Like, we're getting scenes from the Prince Robot. We're getting the journalist's story, which I really like.
We're not getting her, like, text. But we don't know that those bits aren't being narrated by her. I mean, she could very well have found out all of these things later and included them in the story that she is telling.
But what I mean is, I appreciate the fact that it's not like in a novel it would be like third-person limited narration or something. Like, it's not that. Like, we're getting these cutaways to build the universe, and I think that those do such a great job to build the universe. The relationship that Gwendolyn and the Will have, or what's becoming a friendship there. I really like that stuff, and I'm glad that we get to see stuff like that, because I think that if it had just been told through, like, in the scenes that Hazel is in, and we get that narration and we don't get anything else, I think the series would have really suffered.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that a lot of the right decisions were made in the storytelling process early on. So, did you guys want to talk about the art a little bit?
I did want to talk about the art.
I actually had one more thing to say about the story, if that's cool.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines in here, and something that really hit home for me, was the line about killing your sweet pretties. 20 years ago, I've had creative writing courses all my life because I used to want to be a writer. And so 20 years ago, I was 11 and I was in a creative writing course. And I don't want to get into how creepy it is that they were teaching an 11-year-old about killing your sweet pretties, because that's kind of dark if you look at it. But so my whole life through creative writing courses, they've been teaching this and drilling it into my head. And one of my friends recently came out of a creative writing course where they taught him the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at something that's been taught for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the main rules of writing is you can't write something well if you're too close to it. Like,
yeah, that's one of the problems that Joe and I both had with questionable content, popular webcomic, after a certain point, is that the writer just seemed way too attached to his characters and unwilling to actually like test them and put them through conflict and do harmful things to them. Like you have to be willing to hurt your characters.
Well, no, and
in order to like have dramatic tension.
I'm not saying that you can't hurt. Like one of the line in the book is that writers often say you have to kill your sweet pretties, and then the writer in the book says, I disagree. I think that if you're not passionate enough about it, then you have no business writing about it. Well, and I think that is true.
I think that what the idea is I had a professor at Evergreen say this: write your book, then go through and take out like everything, all of your favorite parts, and then rewrite it. And then go through and take out all your favorite parts and then rewrite it. Because the thing is that when you write something, and I think it goes beyond needing to hurt your characters, it has to do with distance. It has to do with, does this work?
Yeah. Because, yes, but if you remove everything that you're passionate about,
you can be passionate about it and still kill the things you love about it. Well, the things you love about it aren't... Passion is not love. Those are two completely separate things.
I wrote a nonfiction book about role-playing games, and I went through an editing process, and my editor marked like lines like, you need to take this out, you need to rewrite this is confusing, like this sentence doesn't work. And a lot of them I ditched, even though I didn't necessarily want to. And there were a couple that I hung on to where I was like, no, I am keeping this line. I do not care what you say to me. This has to be in there. Mm-hmm. And like that is a very hard process to go through.
Absolutely.
Because you, as a writer, like you fall in love with certain sentences, with certain phrases. And when an editor comes to you and says, no, this does not work, like as somebody who is your audience, as somebody who is reading this needs to be changed. And it can be very, very hard to do that. And that's what you need to get. Like, that's what Killing Your Sweet Pretties is about. That's learning to let go of something that doesn't necessarily work or is confusing or just needs to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, it can be hard to let go of the image that's in your head, even if that image isn't necessarily what's coming through on the page.
The passion has to be about the writing, not necessarily the idea. The idea, being too close to the idea, you can be like, oh, I have this part and it's really, really cool. But then somebody reads it and goes, well, this part totally doesn't work with the rest of the theme. It's like, oh, but that's my favorite part.
Well,
you still gotta get rid of it. Like,
I kind of agree with Cade though on part of it, because if you're not passionate about all of the words that you have down, like obviously you're gonna have your favorites. You're gonna have parts that like you may be overly attached to, but like if you've lost the passion for your characters. Like, if that character is not something that you're passionate about writing anymore, maybe it's time to move on to a different character. Like, maybe it's time to move on.
If you're not going to write it well, you have no business writing.
Yeah, and I don't see those as... to me, that's a mutually exclusive... Like, you can be passionate about the writing you're doing.
What I'm saying is the line from this book that I'm talking about is that sometimes killing your sweet pretties removes your passion for what you're writing about.
Well, and I would agree with Chard. Like, if that's the case, then you need to be writing something else. Like, if you are too close to... I honestly, as somebody that has written before, as somebody that is...
Well, you can tell when an author has, like... They're now writing a character no longer because they love it, but now it's for the paycheck, but now it's because people want more books in that series.
Yeah,
I always think of the lines at the beginning of Misery, where... He kills, what's his main character's name?
He kills Misery. That's her name.
Is that her name? Yeah, Misery. He kills that character, and then he's like, because I was tired of writing her, and there was no way that the fans would let go of her unless she was dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and in that case, I do agree that like it's important to be willing to get rid of your characters. But...
And it can be incredibly strong writing if you take the thing that is the center of your story, and you're like, okay, I'm going to take this character, I'm going to kill them.
Yeah.
What now?
Yeah.
Where does that go? And it's about taking the story in a direction that you never thought to go in.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because it was about a certain thing, or it was a certain way. And now that you've made it into something else, now you have to figure out where it goes from there.
And that's where I like about the whole idea of like creative constraint is basically like you may not come up with that on your own. You may not be like, well, now I need to kill my main character. But if you're like writing under a system of creative constraint in which you get to a point and it's like, well, now I have to because of the constraints I've set on myself. Now I have to kill that character. Yeah. And I'm very attached to that character and I don't want to. But now your creativity through that constraint is going to become, you're going to be so much more creative.
I don't necessarily think... When he says you need to kill your sweet pretties, like I think constraining that to like killing a character or whatever, that's kind of taking it too literally.
Well,
what he's saying is that you should never be what I feel he's saying is you should never be so close to a work that you think it's perfect. Like there can always be work done. Like when I always think, I remember talking to a writing teacher of mine that I wrote like the first chapter of a noir story that I'd wanted to write for a while, and he was like, "That's good, but you can take more out." Yeah. And that's like when you like look at like how Hammett wrote and how Chandler wrote, they would write and then they would take out everything that wasn't essential, and just write as narrowly as possible.
Hashtag Dredd says less.
Yeah, and that's like the thing. It's like it's not about the characters. Like I agree. If you don't love a character, then you have no business writing that character.
Well,
but you should never be so attached to an idea that you become rigid, because rigidity will kill you.
But I didn't feel that that's what the point of the line was. I felt that it was about, losing the passion. If you get rid of something that you care about to the point where you don't care about it anymore, then
that's
it's crap.
True.
No,
yeah,
I
that's
totally
true.
agree. That's what I was saying.
That's not what I got.
And this is why I am no longer a writer, because almost 100% of my brain is whimsical and disjointed. If you read my blog post, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because I start out talking about one thing, and halfway through, that thing is out of my brain completely.
Yeah. I think that I talked about this on the Back Matter episode 3 when I was talking about Dredd, but if you didn't listen to that one, something that the writer of Dredd and Carl Urban was specifically talking about was this. They kept cutting lines of Dredd's dialogue, and it wasn't in an attempt to like make the film shorter or make Dredd, just intentionally more dull or anything. It was essentially, it wasn't about how much dialogue was being said. It was about refining the dialogue.
Absolutely.
Like taking like a lot of something and making it into less, but the best that you could possibly make it into. Yeah. Like quality over quantity, essentially.
Distillation.
Yeah,
like,
distillation,
it's one
exactly.
thing to be like, oh, Dredd shoots the guy, and then he says something really off the cuff and cool, but that's not Dredd. That's not who Dredd is. Dredd doesn't drop the one.
It totally is.
Well, no, but
yes,
it's like,
oh my god, the line where
what
he
I mean
shoots
is not in like, he's not James Bond, right?
Yeah,
and he's very.
You know what Dredd is? It's that panel where he says, "Gaze into the fist of Dredd," and he punches through the guy's head.
Yeah.
That's Judge Dredd. Like, he doesn't have a long soliloquy.
No.
He's not monologuing. He's not having witty repartee. He says a thing, and he does a thing.
If you haven't seen the movie, spoilers, sorry, but there's a part in the movie where he gets shot and he's cornered, and he's like, wait. And then the other guy gets like, like he's making fun of him. He's like, wait, for what? What do you do? And then that character gets shot, and Dredd says, wait for her to shoot you. And it's like, that's Dredd, right?
But like, I really feel like Dredd was saying that literally. Like, he was honestly waiting.
Exactly. Yeah. He's very literal in what he says.
It's not like, ice to meet you. Right?
No, it's not that.
And it's not, and he never, it's never like trying with Dredd, because like with Peter Parker, you can obviously see,
exactly.
He's trying to
and also
find new things.
The funny thing about Peter is he'll throw lines out, like he's like rehearsing, he'll say something and it'll be like, okay, that one didn't work, let's try another joke.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows that Spider-Man runs his mouth constantly.
Oh yeah.
And part of that is him covering for the fact that he's nervous.
And
part of it is because he's so goddamn fast that if he distracts his opponent, that gives him a huge advantage.
Yeah. So I think what we're trying to say is if you haven't seen Dredd yet, why?
Yeah.
There's no justifiable reason
you
that
should.
you have not seen Dredd yet, and you should watch Dredd.
If you are remembering the Sylvester Stallone movie, put that completely out of your brain. This is the real Judge Dredd.
I liked the Stallone movie.
But no, this new one.
Why am I not surprised?
But the new one,
I love it too because it's hilarious and it makes me laugh.
But the new one is 1,000+ times better.
If you want
Rob
a
Schneider,
movie
Joe.
that you can watch with drinking beer with your buddies and crack wise on, watch the original Dredd.
What?
If you want a great action movie that's true to the character and is fucking like brilliantly shot,
if you like comic
brilliantly
books,
scripted,
watch this
and
movie.
will leave you at the end with your mouth slightly hanging over, watch Dredd. Because Carl Urban is amazing.
Yeah, he totally gets it.
He should have been Batman.
Rob
Actually,
Schneider.
someone asked him about that.
Yeah, he didn't want
at
it
the panel.
Yep.
That's not.
That's in the well, maybe he's
not exactly what he said at the panel. Essentially, what he was. Carl Urban is a very diplomatic man, and he answered a lot of the questions with a lot more grace than I would have, because people were like, "Oh, you did a lot of acting with the bottom half of your face in that movie. Have you ever thought about being Batman?" To which I would respond, like, "What the kind of fuck question is that?
Yeah,
like,
no.
that's not a question." But he was very much like,
you would have just been like, "Fuck you, next question."
yeah. Well, that's what I would have done. That's why people don't listen to me. But
well, we obviously know that's not true. Since
No, it's
to
the fact that he can admit that, which is why we're all here.
He was basically saying, like, oh, that's very kind of you to think that I could play a role like Batman because Batman is such a strong character, and he was very effusive about the character of Batman. And then he was like, I think that there wasn't even a casting call.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much...
I don't know that if I was gone or what, but he said it didn't sound like Warner Brothers wanted anybody but Ben Affleck.
Yeah,
they wrote that role for him. Or he was their first choice anyway.
Yeah.
And he was saying, like, he's excited to see what happened.
And part of that was because
diplomatic.
Ben Affleck said he didn't want to be Batman unless specific things happened. And then they took him on a tour of the studio, and they told him everything that was going to happen, what they want to do with it. And they proved to him that they had the right idea in mind. So he said, okay.
What's really funny to me, and this is so far off topic, but what's really funny to me is that there's this, like, mindset in Hollywood of, like, oh, well, we'll get this name or we'll get this person, and, like, they'll do a great job with it. And then the person will say, no, I don't want to do it. And you know, but they'll just keep fucking courting them and, like, raising the price. And that's, like, exactly what they did with Ben Affleck, but definitely what they did with J.J. Abrams and Star Wars. Because he did not want the role of directing Star Wars. He kept saying no and no and no, and they just kept raising the price of him directing. So we'll see how it works. But, like, that's such a foreign idea to me, and especially for comic books, where it's just like, no, you get the person who wants the job the most. Like, you get the person with passion.
Well, you get the right. It's like we said on Back Matter the number 2, right?
Yeah.
You get the person that's right for the role. Not the person that's going to give you the biggest box office.
But not even that.
And not the person that is... it's like you get the person that's right for the role. And if they want it a lot, that's great. And if they don't want it, then you find the next best person for the role.
I just think
ostensibly
that, like,
you do
passion,
that. The thing is that isn't necessarily what happens. And there was a story not too long ago where DC was secretly doing clam bakes. Like, they'd say to a writer, like, oh yeah, we want you for this comic. Go ahead and write a script. And they'd say that to, like, 3 different guys, and they'd have them write a script on spec, and then they'd pick the one that they wanted the most.
Yeah.
And these guys were getting dicked around.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that, like, passion is so important, and that comes across. And it's something that we are lucky to see in indie comics specifically. You know, books like this is where it's like, these are creators writing characters that they love in universes that they created and care about. Like, the passion is very obviously there. It's when we go to, like, mainstream comics and we see this, like, manufactured universe where the creators are not nearly as passionate, and I think that you can see that.
Absolutely.
And it's something that makes me glad that Image Comics has really, like, founded a part of the comic book industry that can support books like this. And without books like this, I probably wouldn't read many comics anymore, to be honest, because with DC doing what they're doing,
I would certainly be a lot less enthusiastic. And I think we would have a lot less interesting of a comic book community, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, if superhero comic books were the only thing coming out, we wouldn't have this podcast. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
How much can you talk about the latest Batman does the same fucking thing he's done for the last 75 years.
It's specifically mainstream superheroes. You
No,
know,
absolutely.
Like these are, we've talked about it a ton of times before, but you know, they're not characters anymore.
They're properties.
They're properties, and so Image has done such a great job in like opening up the comic book community to people who don't give a shit about superhero comics. You know, there's so many people getting into comics now because of the Walking Dead TV show. They couldn't give two shits about superhero comics, and they're reading Image comics for the first time. And if they take a gateway from the Walking Dead comic to something like this, or to another Image book that is also not about superheroes, like, you can really, you know, you can do a lot to create a new community of readers, and that's something that Image, I think, is doing, and something that companies like DC and Marvel have a really hard time understanding how to do, is like create a new community of readers.
I just love the fact that if you walk into a comic book shop and you pick up an Image Volume 1, that book is $10.
Oh.
Doesn't matter how big it is, doesn't matter how like popular of a title is.
Yep.
Every volume 1 is $10.
That's such.
I think that is a brilliant marketing thing.
Oh yeah, it lowers the cost of initial entry into the book, and by the time you're done with the first trade, you're like, well, fuck, now I'm really interested. I want to buy the next one, and the next one's at full price, which is fine. Because,
yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean they got to make their
only
money.
like $15 to $17, which is
I think a lot of them are 18, but still, like that's
compared
not
to Marvel,
unreasonable.
which is like $20 for 4 issues
Marvel
or
wants
something.
entirely
Now.
too much money. Even Vertigo, I picked up the first trade of a certain thing that I'm going to be recommending in a little bit that I'm not going to say the name of yet. $10 for 7 issues.
Yeah,
$10 for 7 issues.
That's really good.
That's a fucking steal, man. That's good. That's good right there. Yeah. That's the price point you want to be looking for your actual media right there. And it's a great story.
And it's interesting too because books companies like Image and Vertigo, like they live off of the trade. Like they don't sell nearly as many single issues as Marvel and DC, and yet they are, and it's no wonder that their trades are successful because they're at reasonable price points.
Yeah.
Like that's not surprising to anyone.
Well, and they're also the only ones doing anything even remotely interesting right now. So,
well, I mean,
not the only ones,
still
but
Marvel books I'm reading. But...
Like Marvel is doing some good stuff. I'm super stoked about a lot of stuff that's going to go on over there. Like Mike Allred's Silver Surfer, which I believe is
Miss
the title.
Marvel is fantastic.
He was born to write. Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel. I mean,
Ghost Rider's really good.
There's actually a really, really good article that if you haven't seen, I posted it on the website, and I might actually post a link to on the site now that I'm talking about it on the podcast, about what is wrong with comic books and comic book journalism, and why the way you think things are is not the way they are at all. And you should go and read it because it's an excellent, excellent critique of comic book journalism and everything that's wrong with it.
I would call that quote-unquote journalism, which is a lot of modern journalism.
Yeah, and absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. It really, it's every kind. It's modern journalism, especially in this country, in the age of the 24-hour news cycle. It's the fact that you're going to these places to get news, and in comic books about the things you love, and you're being handed softball questions with pre-planned answers that were given because Marvel would play nice with the journalists if they didn't ask the hard-hitting questions, or DC is especially guilty of this.
Oh, they blacklist tons of websites.
Yeah, so go and read it because it's an excellent piece of actual journalism. Yeah, it's an excellent piece of actual journalism, and it's on outhousers.com, and I will throw up the link on the website. When this episode airs,
it's our Facebook page.
It's linked to on our Facebook page, so you can definitely check it out there.
Yeah. If we don't get it up there, I want to talk about the art.
Yeah, I desperately want to talk about the art.
There's a great little in the end of one of the books. There was a little thing by Fiona Staples going, "This is how I do the art. It's all digital." Mm-hmm. And she basically takes her sketches and scans them in, and then resizes them, and then just inks them directly.
Yeah.
And then does like the backgrounds and everything. And by far, my hands down favorite thing about this book is the art. I could look at it all day. It is fucking fantastic.
Well, I was actually kind of blown away because if you look at the line work in the later issues, it's super duper clean. Like
absolutely.
Very, very sharp. And going back to volume 1, like I opened up page 1, I was like, whoa, this is so like sketchy and squiggly and weird. And it kind of like slowly morphed over the first several issues so that by the time you get to the end of volume 1, it's kind of hit that point where the line work was a lot cleaner and a lot sharper. And it really starts transitioning around issue like 4 and 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was totally taken aback because I had completely forgotten what it looked like at the very beginning because it was a really different style. But I think Fiona Staples like really upped her game really quickly.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
This is like,
and it was
for my money, like one of the best artworks of a comic book coming out right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, and when you talk about Fiona Staples, she's phenomenal, and she hasn't been around that long as far as comic artists go. I think her first thing was in 2009.
I have no idea.
So relatively new in the scheme of things to comic books, and you can tell that, like, every single issue she does, she is growing as an artist. And she has worked on some incredible books that we've recommended on the show, such as North 40. I had another example that just left my mind.
Did she do North 40?
Yeah.
I feel like that was 2007.
I thought it was 2009.
I could totally be wrong. I'm going to look it up while you keep talking.
I'm already on it.
Something that I find really refreshing about this series is how the backgrounds are done. And I don't know if it's something that's... It's something I find really uncommon in comic book art is to treat the backgrounds like this. But the line art in the foreground is all black line. It's all like very clean line art, very super sharp lines, but it has a black outline. And the background is done with essentially like a color hold where there are no black lines outlining all the background. The colors extend into the line art itself. And because it's done digitally, it's really a lot. It feels a lot smoother, as the colors in the background take on kind of a texture of their own as a background color, and they are so much more distant from the foreground images, which allow you to just like focus on how stylistically clean all the art is on all the characters. And it's especially impressive when it's huge landscapes in the background.
I love all the character designs.
Yes.
I was actually just about to mention that because from what I've read, she does also do some of the story with Brian K.
No,
Vaughan.
they collaborate. Yeah, they definitely collaborate.
And so, and one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading this and just looking at the art from issue to issue is I wonder how much of this is her caring about the characters more than she did at the beginning. Like, I mean, obviously, if she created them, she cared about them somewhat. But as the characters grow throughout the story, that could have an impact on the way she draws them. And I just thought that was pretty neat.
As she becomes more comfortable drawing the characters, too, like the more times she's drawn the same character, I'm sure the faster and cleaner she's able to draw the
Absolutely.
character. You know?
She's also really, really good at drawing very expressive faces.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important to kind of emotionally connecting with the characters, which is such a significant part of the series.
Yeah,
absolutely. So North 40 was in 2010. Her first published work was Amphibious Nightmare, and a 24-hour comic included in the About Comics anthology, 24-Hour Comics Day Highlights. 24-Hour Comics Day Highlights.
What year?
I think that was actually 2005.
That was in 2005, and her first series assignment was 2006's Done to Death, working with Andrew Foley for Marcosia. Then she did Trick or Treat for Wildstorm, and she was the penciler and inker of The Secret History of the Authority, Huxmore, written by Mike Costa.
Okay, so she's been in the industry.
She's been a while. She's been around for a while.
I just remember that it was about 2009 that I really started hearing about her, is I guess what I should say.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, where people were like, break out new artists, blah, blah, blah.
Good friend of the show, Eric Troutman, has said before, it took him 10 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's always so hard to, like, find out, like, when a creator, like, really, you know, blew up over and became essentially an overnight success after 10 years, because... So many people were fans of their work before too. I mean, that's how they became a success. Was they had fans first?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Maybe they didn't have the massive numbers of fans as they have now, but those fans really supported them. And so to say like, oh, they were, they've been in the industry for this long. Like, you never really know, like, how that whole sequence or series, like, when it came about.
Well, which is why I think it's important to familiarize yourself with the creators, like artists and writers, their entire body of work, because then, it's all well and good for somebody to make it big in an industry, and of course that's what we're hoping for, especially when it's people we like.
Yeah,
like Fiona Staples.
Yeah, but like if you like Fiona Staples, if you like Brian K. Vaughan, if you like whoever, go back and like immerse yourself, figure out what else they've done, read it, get a hold on it, because even if the early stuff isn't great, and a lot of times it's not gonna be, it gives you like a basis for comparison. It gives you kind of like a place to see where they've grown from. And that's cool. Like, I like that.
Absolutely. No, like reading an artist or a writer's early work, like a lot of times they'll like repeat certain motifs or ideas as they refine them, as they go like, well, I did this a long time ago, but I'm still really enamored with this idea. And now that I'm much better at my craft, I want to do it again and get it right. And looking at that early stuff, it really gives you a sense of like, where are they coming from? Like, what is the raw idea that they're trying to get at?
Absolutely.
And reading their early stuff gives you an appreciation for what their craft really is, and what's good about the better stuff.
Right. And also, like, as a creator, if you have any intention of becoming a creator, it's so easy to get disillusioned in the fact that, like, oh, well, I'm just not good enough because the first thing I ever wrote or the first thing I ever drew was not as good as the best thing that someone who's already famous did.
Yeah, which is...
like, you need to go back and look at where they started and where they came from to give yourself perspective as a potential creator. Like,
absolutely.
how far they've come. And not to compare yourself like, oh, by this time they had done this much stuff, but just... everybody has to start from ground zero.
Absolutely.
I mean, and talent aside, which is, a different argument for a different day, like, you still have to grow from nothing.
And sometimes you have to write Ultimate X-Men.
And sometimes you have to write Ultimate X-Men, which...
Brian K. Vaughan, Robert Kirkman...
was a series that was damned well before any of those writers ever put their pen on the
Cade, what year was Ultimate X-Men? No, I'm just kidding.
Look it up on Wikipedia.
You look it up on Wikipedia.
There's a thing. It's called
it's
like
called
your
trades
phone.
11 and 12. I don't remember what year that was.
And there is one other little thing that I just wanted to point out that I love in this series, and that's the Will's hood, which you can see on the back of his cloak. And as far as I have noticed, he never puts it up.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for that moment because I know that moment's got to come.
Well, his cloak is so cool because it's like laser proof and fireproof and like, oh, it's awesome. It's
it's super awesome. And you can see that hood on it, and it's like, that hood has to do something.
Yeah.
After reading Private Eye, I kind of think that when he puts it up, it's going to have the face on the back of it.
Yeah, like, does he turn invisible? Does it let him see through walls? Like, does it give him superpowers? You don't know.
Yeah.
There's magic in this setting. It could be anything.
Yeah. No,
and I know that moment is coming.
Yeah,
and I'm so excited for it.
That's something that's so cool about this series, too, is how well it blends the whole idea of science fiction and also magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they make references to exotic matter when magic is used, like... they've obviously thought about how this setting works.
And I love the magic that he does where he needs the spell ingredient is a secret, basically because it's a fun way for you to kind of like learn about the characters without feeling like they're just...
yes,
that's
very
cool.
That was cool.
Exposition, right.
All right, well, let's...
do you guys
I feel like we're all toiling under the heavy, like, Damocles sword that is the vacuum cleaner of the janitor.
If you can't hear it in the background, there is an occasional cutting in of vacuum from another one of the offices in our building. So I think we'll move on to recommendations now, unless you guys have anything...
No, I think I'm good.
Cutting to add. All right.
Just a final thought. If, for whatever reason, you're listening and you haven't read Saga... definitely check it out because it is so much fun.
Yeah. It is super fun. And I said it before, I think on the last episode when I pitched this, but I feel like it's a really good gateway comic.
Absolutely,
for people who have never read comics before and they think everything is about superheroes with their underwear on the outside of their pants. Like,
well, and
this is so not like that.
I'll tell you something else.
And
you're looking to get... this is a comic that... I think everybody can love too. So if you have that special somebody in your life and they're like, no, I don't like those. That's all super. Give them this.
Well,
because
Yeah.
I really think that this can be appreciated even by people that don't like what is largely considered to be comic books. You can't see me. I'm making air quotes like an asshole with my fingers.
Well, like I've said many times, like comic books are not a genre.
Yeah, exactly.
Medium.
And this is a good book to hand to somebody and be like, here, read this. It's 6 issues. It reads really fast. And even if you don't like the story, you'll love looking at it. Check it out. And I guarantee you, they may like it. I don't know. That's as far as I'm willing to go with that.
This is something a little sad. I've had more luck getting people to read this than I have getting people to read Barry Wayne.
Well, which is sad,
that's just an
like,
injustice.
I feel like this is a little bit of an easier gateway, especially since Barry Wayne, like, especially if you have the big book of Barry Wayne, it seems enormous, but it's also just like people kind of have these assumptions about it going into it because they feel like, oh, it's comic strippy.
Yeah.
It's like a comic strip. I don't like comic strips anymore, or I don't really read comic strips. And I think that does it just a disservice because it's not really like a comic strip, but it has the heart that a lot of old comic strips used to have, like Calvin and Hobbes or Peanuts or something, where it's like these characters are the focus of the story. It's about the characters.
Yeah,
absolutely. The strip is about the characters.
Absolutely.
So.
Totes.
Anyway, let's move on to recommendations. Joe, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. So I brought a book that I've been trying to read for a while and finally waiting for the Night Vale panel on Friday. I had it all on my iPad and I read it and I loved it. I brought Federal Bureau of Physics, formerly known as Collider.
Only the first 2 issues?
The first issue. Only the first issue.
One, yeah.
But it's... I mean, to sum it up, it's pretty much what if the laws of physics were breaking down or changing in some kind of radically profound way, and there was a force that policed these changes and was the sole responsibility to make sure that the loss of life and property was minimized.
Everybody knows that the best crimes are science crimes.
Absolutely.
If you saw Thor 2... There's the scenes where they're like dropping things down the hallway and they're just like appearing in other places. Like physics does not
this
have
kind
a
of
hold
stuff
on that. It's like imagine that, but on a massive scale.
And it's great because
in a downtown metropolitan area or something.
On like the 3rd or 4th page, a guy calls 911 and they go, 911, what is the nature of your emergency? Is it like, do you need police? Do you need fire?
Yeah.
Do you need like an ambulance? Or is it physics?
Yeah.
And that kind of grabbed me right away, and it just goes on from there. I really, really like this. This is right up my alley, man.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me. I'm really sorry. I had this a story. In England, when you call 119, when they ask if
It's 999.
Yeah, it's 999.
Oh, 999. Sorry. I knew it was very close to ours, but different. When you call the dispatcher and they ask if you need fire, police, or ambulance, it doesn't matter what they have to, you have to answer who you're looking for. If you say there's a fire, they can't patch you through because they don't know whether you want the cops to respond to the fire, the ambulance to respond to the fire, or the fire department to respond to the fire.
Yeah.
Which I thought was so weird because here in America, they dispatch everybody.
Yeah.
When you call
Which is
when I called 911, they just said, like, what's the nature of the emergency?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in England, you actually have to tell them which you want to respond. Who do you want to talk to?
Well, it's actually kind of efficient because if you, like, before you can even describe, like, oh, there are people injured, like, and they take that down. If you're just like, I need ambulance, and they can just immediately dispatch an ambulance to your location and then, like, get the details later.
No,
right?
It is.
Yeah,
I just thought when
efficient.
I was hearing that, I was like, wow, that's interesting.
It goes a long way to build this universe of the Federal Bureau of Physics because, like, in a world in which that's one of the options on 911, this has been happening for a while.
Absolutely. And basically the whole thing is, like, if the rules are the impossible is given the right circumstances, the impossible is always possible.
Mm-hmm. And I only read the first couple of issues of this, but I remember it being incredibly colorful.
It is, and that's what I was going to get to. It's Like, it's incredibly illustrated. It's beautifully colored. It pops on just about every page. The imagery is just... there's really nothing about this book I didn't like. I think it's really, really... it was an interesting story, and I love the way it's presented.
Well, and it also will appeal to you if you're kind of the fan of like police procedurals in a way.
Yeah,
because there's very much that
it's
like
definitely got part of that
bureaucracy, inter-office bureaucracy, as far as like the hierarchy of like you're the detective and the sergeant and like the police chief who tells you to go take this case, and then there's also the whole relationship with partners, which this first arc is like very much about, is the relationship between these two partners.
Yeah.
And who is it by?
It's by Simon Oliver, Robbie Rodriguez, and Rico Renzi. I think they're all very talented. If this work is any indication, I really, really enjoyed it. And so, yeah. Federal Bureau of Physics.
Yeah, and the trade is out now. So you
yeah,
can
and
it
it's
includes
$10 from Vertigo.
The first
seven issues. Yeah,
so.
the first full arc.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
That's a crazy good deal as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Should I go next?
Some of this art even reminds me of The Sword.
Yeah, it's some of it's really loose and sketchy, like when they're in kind of like the physicsy environment, like it tends to loosen up a little bit, and then other times it's like very clean line art.
I was just flipping through a couple of pages that are very clean and colorful.
Yeah,
and then the very next page there's an action part where it's very sketchy and things look like they're moving.
And that's one of the things I like about it is
the
that
fluidity of the art is really impeccable. I think it goes a long way to enforce the setting. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to go
sure.
next, Tobias?
So, when I was a kid, my favorite superhero was Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
Hands down. And I was also a really big fan of science fiction.
Yeah.
And so my favorite Spider-Man was Spider-Man 2099.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was an incredible book.
It was incredibly good. And just last week, they announced... Because Spider-Man 2099 has been in the present day, hanging out in Superior Spider-Man.
Yeah, if you haven't been reading Superior
They're
Spider-Man.
going to be doing a new Spider-Man 2099 series set in the present with Miguel O'Hara.
Yeah.
Written by Peter David, the writer of the original series.
Yep.
Which was actually something I wanted to talk about on Back Matter last week, but we didn't do Back Matter because of the ECC.
Yeah, we were at ECC.
So that's like... It's going to be coming out in like July or something like that, and I'm super stoked.
I'm excited as well.
I am pitching Volume 1 of Spider-Man 2099.
Nice.
It's the first 10 issues. Marvel, in their infinite wisdom, put out... The series is 46 issues overall. They put out Volumes 1 and 2, which is the first 20 issues, so like the first half of the series.
Uh-huh.
And then they never put out the rest of the series. Which
Yay.
is super awesome.
Numbers being too low.
But it's really good. You can get the first 2 volumes. I'm just going to say we should read the first one because it ends at a good point.
Sweet.
And Volume 2 has part 1 of... I can't remember but it was the first big crossover where like Asgard is there and Thor, and like it crosses over between Punisher and Doom and Ravage. Yeah. And they include the one Spider-Man issue that kicked it off, and then not any of the others.
Hooray!
Yay!
Yeah, super.
It's our favorite thing!
Yay, collections. The collections departments of both Marvel and DC, ever since I worked at a comic book store, I've wanted to like murder the people in charge of those two departments. Because it makes no fucking sense.
So really quickly, if you don't know anything about it, the year is 2099.
Yes.
Miguel O'Hara is a geneticist for Alchemax Corporation, in their corporate raider division. It's basically a cyberpunk world where like megacorps run everything. And so he's basically making super spies.
Yeah.
And the template, the thing that they're basing his research off of is the original Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And some shitty things happen, and he ends up being subjected to his own medical experiment, and he gets spider powers.
Very classic kind of 60s Silver Age, 50s, 60s Silver Age origin, really, where like, oh, we've gone too far with science.
Yeah, and like Alchemax is trying to hunt him because he's got their like proprietary technology, and they want to like reproduce him, and he's fighting people in the downtown, like the ruins of 20th century New York, and it's super cool. super cyberpunky. There's a cult of Thor, and there's like Thorites all over the city.
Sweet.
Because he was a god on Earth,
Yeah.
and then he vanished, and now people worship him, which is super cool.
Yeah.
It was just a great, fun environment. Spider-Man 2099 was a great series, and it's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I love Elseworlds and What If stories. It's something I talk about all the time on the show, but this was like, you know, before the Ultimates universe, like, what if we created this alternate universe where we could just tell these stories about brand new characters? Kind of doing a very DC thing in the Marvel universe, which is like, let's create a legacy, like a future for some of these characters that we haven't really aged in a long time. So
and it was a really
cool,
really interesting universe that made some very interesting choices.
Yeah, Doom 2099 was Warren Ellis too, so
later on.
Yeah. I've heard that stuff is outstanding, although I've never read that. So awesome.
Doom 2099 is a really great series. Spider-Man 2099 is really great. Punisher and Ravage, not so much. X-Men 2099, also good.
Was good. And Ghost Rider 2099 was good.
I have
never read that one.
First 17 of X-Men 2099, and it was really good.
X-Men 2099 was good. Ghost Rider was one that flew largely under the radar, but Chris Bachalo, thank you, Richard Starkings, for telling me how to say that name, because I've been wondering for years. Chris Bachalo did the art, and it looked fantastic. And it was like right around the time that there was like much more digital coloring going on, and so it had this really slick futuristic look. And the new Ghost Rider was a virus, and it kind of
a computer virus.
Yeah, it was a computer virus. I thought it was a really cool concept. I haven't gone back and read it in 15 years, so but I'm going to go home tonight and read it, and you'll all see that I was right.
Well, I sat down and reread the first 10 issues of Spider-Man 2099 because I collected all of them when they were coming out.
Yeah.
And it stands up.
Nice.
Except for issue 9, which has a different artist who is awful.
Yeah, that happens.
Awful. But the rest of the art is really great.
I know.
All right. Cade, what you got?
All right, so I've been reading... Okay, so a few weeks ago, I pitched Guardians of the Galaxy Marvel Now, and it was recommended to me to read Guardians of the Galaxy Post-Annihilation before Marvel Now. So I've been reading Prelude to Annihilation, and I just started Annihilation, and I thought it'd be cool to talk about Annihilation, so that's my pick.
Yeah, it's a fantastic series. If you're a fan of Marvel Cosmic at all, if you read along with us when we did Infinity Gauntlet, and you're like, man, I want more like Marvel Cosmic, but maybe like a little bit more modern storytelling, I think that Abnett and Lanning like absolutely fucking nailed it on Annihilation. It was like so many characters that no one was touching. In
Ronan the Accuser
of Drax the Destroyer, who had not been used in a long time, like just tons of these characters, like Nova, who had kind of fallen off the wayside after he left the New Warriors. There was just like
it's really interesting sometimes when you have a character and then they kind of like redefine it, and suddenly like everything that has come before that is 100% forgotten, and like the new version of the character, like that's all anybody cares about.
Right.
And that happened with Nick Fury when Ultimate Nick Fury came out. Like it was just so much of a stronger character suddenly that was like, okay, Ultimate Nick Fury, he's the only one.
Right.
And that happened with Richard Rider as Nova.
Oh,
I'm not going to spoil it, but some things happen at the very beginning of Annihilation, and he undergoes this like huge revision where suddenly he is batting like 5 leagues above where he was.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And
he's
it
now
is
at
super cool.
The quote unquote cosmic power level, because that's something cool about Marvel is like all these cosmic beings are much stronger than Earth's heroes, as you saw if you read Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah.
And so they really uppowered Nova to be able to deal with those cosmic threats, and it's super fun. And right after Annihilation, books 1, 2, and 3 is the mini series that led into Annihilation Conquest, which is where the Guardians of the Galaxy were reformed as a modern Guardians of the Galaxy, rather than as the future Avengers, which is what they originally were.
There's Annihilation, which was the Annihilation
and
wave.
That's 3 trades, yeah.
And then the Nova series went for a while. And then they did Annihilation Conquest, and that's where Guardians of the Galaxy started. And then that went for a couple of years before what was the name of
War of Kings, Realm of Kings,
right?
Came next,
And then
that crossed over really heavily with X-Men, which was confusing for a lot of people who had not been reading X-Men at the time, because there was a whole team of X-Men that were out in space dealing with Scott and Havoc's brother Vulcan,
Poop-Face.
And then it was after War of Kings that they did Annihilators, which was like Beta Ray Bill, is it Guardian? The head of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard.
Gladiator.
It was Beta Ray Bill, Gladiator, Ronin, the Silver Surfer, like all of these heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna form our own super team and just ruin planets.
Yeah.
Like, we're just gonna annihilate these bad guys.
There was
because fuck
also
them.
a big Thanos thing that went on in there too.
I think that was the Thanos imperative.
Yeah, I think that's what that was called.
And then,
prelude to Annihilation is is Thanos.
And then after that, that's when the new Marvel Now Guardians started.
Right, and the new Nova is.
So there was kind of this like long chronology of cosmic events and series that were going on that all started with Annihilation.
And it did get really confusing near the end, which is why it was really cool that they relaunched Guardians at the Guardians of the Galaxy Point Now and the new Nova, because it had kind of gotten convoluted. But Annihilation is so accessible because you don't need to know anything that came before, is why I think it's kind of the perfect introduction to Marvel Cosmic if you're looking for a modern introduction rather than Infinity Gauntlet.
We've kind of had like almost 10 years of Marvel Cosmic going on.
Yeah.
And it really all started with Annihilation. Like, you start there, it's the perfect jumping on point because nothing else that came before that, like, super matters.
Yeah. And
like, it's good to know who some characters are.
The Inhumanity stuff going on now, isn't it?
Not
in a
really.
way, sort of. Like, loosely, yes. A lot of the stuff that happens with the Inhumans is like an effect of certain things that happened with the Kree in this whole
Black Bolt is one of the kings involved in the War of Kings.
Yeah.
But, like, it's good to know, like, who Gamora is and some other characters like that. But even if you don't, you can jump right into this trade and be like, okay, this is my jumping on point. Now I can read everything else.
Yeah, with the exception of Infinity Gauntlet, I had really never read much Marvel Cosmic before this, and it was just a perfect introduction. And it's just such a strong arc, these 3 volumes of trade.
Abnett and Lanning knock it out of the park.
They're great. I love them. Kate, anything else you wanted to say about this series?
I don't think so.
All right.
I'm not entirely sure what we would read if it's picked, but we can figure it out.
There's 3 main Annihilation trades that I think collect. It was like
the first one collects a lot of miniseries, which are really good.
Yeah, there were miniseries that kind of launched it because there was a thing with Drax, there was a thing with Nova,
there was a thing with Ronin.
Yeah, because Annihilation itself is only 6 issues,
right? But the lead-ins are really helpful too.
And it's by Keith Giffen as well.
We'd probably do volumes 1, 2, and 3.
Probably.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's
it's not
good thing.
It's not too long.
It's pretty big.
18 issues.
I think it's more than that.
I think it's something like 24, maybe 28.
Well, we'll make it work.
Yeah.
So, what did you bring, Chard?
Well, I am on a kick because on Saturday night, if you did not listen to the back matter
or anything that you said previously on this episode,
that's right. I went and saw Carl Urban, and I've been thinking about nothing but Dredd for like 2 days, and so I've
been filled with Dredd for 2 days.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about nothing but Dredd. I went over to the 2000 AD booth, and they were selling a lot of the trades at half price. And so I picked up a fat book, Dredd, The Complete Case Files, Volume 7, for $10, which is an incredible deal.
That is an incredible deal.
And it's huge. It's a huge book. They're not numbered pages, so I don't know how many pages there are in this book. But
it looks close to 300.
Yeah, it's
many.
It's fat. It's phone book
5
style.
million.
And the cool thing about Dredd is this is volume 7, but Dredd is serialized because it's very serial in the way that like comic strips are serial, where it's like it's not really important that you read a lot of them in order because there is no origin story for Dredd. In the first appearance of Dredd, he's already a judge. He's already Judge Dredd. There's no like, oh, and this is how he became a judge. This is when he took, he got his powers or whatever. This
you mean
story.
He didn't mail in a coupon on the back of a cereal box?
I thought he was bitten by a radioactive judge.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being bitten by a radioactive judge, the first story in this book is called The Cry of the Werewolf. And it's about Judge Dredd fighting werewolves that have come up from the Undercity under Mega City 1. And I want to read to you the first line of this book. In Mega City 1, Judge Dredd makes his 300th arrest of the day. That's it. That's the intro. That's all you need. That's all you need to know. It's like fucking Mega City 1 is full of criminals. It's a shitty place for basically everyone ever to live. And there is only these judges to help uphold the law. And this book, each story is essentially they're 8 pages and they're multi-part stories. So they're like multi-part 8-page stories. I think they're 8 or 10 issue storylines. Well, that first one was only 7. But they're like, you know, multiple issues, but they're 8-page stories. So they're like really short stories, but there's a couple parts to them, and they read so fast. And
this was originally published in 2000 AD, which is a British, I think, monthly anthology book.
Yes,
that a lot of like big name UK creators got their start on. Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison, Warren Ellis,
Brian Bolland. This first story is drawn by Steve Dillon.
Yeah.
So like there's the werewolf story. There's a story that has dinosaurs in it in the middle of this. There's a haunting of the section house by ghosts in one of these stories, and they're super fun, and you read them super fast, and it's great to just like dig into Dredd and just, you know, just kind of figure out what the whole world is about, because the more you read, the more you kind of like learn about, you know, Mega City 1 and the Cursed Earth and like what's going on within the judge's precinct and the judge house and like how the whole politics of everything works. And Dredd's just such a fucking cool character that he sleeps with his goddamn helmet on. And
well, he is the law.
I've
heard.
It's great.
That's what they say.
There's a scene in where he books some time in a sleep tube because he has to work a double shift. He's like, better book me 10 minutes in the sleep machine. And then it shows him in the sleep machine. He's still got his helmet on. He's like, yeah, I sleep with this.
Totally.
This is my face now.
Why would you not?
And it's great. And everyone should go read some Judge Dredd, because it's so easy to get into it. You can just kind of pick up any story, and there's so many American stories being told about Judge Dredd that have like some really great artists and writers involved. But this early 2000 AD stuff, and this stuff was published in the mid 80s, 83 being the first story, and it's just nice to just grab a book and kind of not need a huge amount of reading. And something that the 2000 AD guys were really like pushing at their booth was, you know, this is not superhero comics. Like, if all you think there are superhero comics, like,
right,
you should definitely read that. I mean, like, they obviously didn't need to tell me that, but they were telling everyone that, you know, because they were very much like, no, just try this because you've never read a comic like this. And it's true. I've never read another comic like this, and it's awesome.
So that's Judge Dredd Case Files, Volume 7.
These are the 2000 AD reprints. They're called the Complete Case Files, and they're huge fat books. There's a ton of them. They're about $20 each, and this one specifically is the Complete Case Files, Volume 7.
Very similar to the Essential Marvel.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very similar. Although you hurt that book's feeling by calling it big and fat.
Why?
That's a compliment in comics.
It's a compliment.
You could
Coming from Chard, it's definitely a compliment.
I'm complimenting its largeness.
Its girth? Would you say you're complimenting its girth?
I am.
Okay.
It's
Call
hefty,
it girthy.
It's weightiness.
It's enormity.
It's weighty and girthy and rotund.
It's a great value.
Not rotund.
It's cool. It's very much like the Essentials and not like the DC Showcase, because they are in chronological order.
I had one more.
Oh, go ahead.
You buy your comics by the pound?
Yeah, if you want a good value for your weight, like, this is a good way to do it. So
good deal.
Awesome. So Joe.
Yeah, what do you want to read?
What? No, I'm going to vote for Annihilation. Just because I haven't read it in a while, and I enjoyed it, and I like seeing Drax kick some ass.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cade?
That's a really tough choice. All three of these are really good picks that make me excited. I'm going to go for Spider-Man 2099, though.
Nice.
I'm also going to vote for Annihilation.
Oh, sweet. I was going to vote for Annihilation, too.
Awesome.
But because I couldn't, I'm going to vote for my own book instead. So we're reading Annihilation. We'll, if we decide not to read the first 2 trades, we'll post that. But most likely we'll be reading the first 3 trades of Annihilation proper.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And if you're looking for it, watch out. There's Annihilation Classic.
Don't read that.
Do not read that. That is reprints of stories about these characters from like back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
It's
now,
be good.
I wanted to say something before we close, because I have been having a really hard time lately finding things to pitch on the show, and I would like to send a shout out. Send recommendations to Cade at View from the Gutters.
Oh, please do.
And Cade at viewfromthegutters.com, and I can promise you, if I can track it down, I will read it and recommend it on the show.
Awesome.
So please do that so that I can stop staring at my shelf for 30 minutes on end trying to figure out what to bring.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes right before we record, I'll make like a snap decision about what I'm going to bring, because I don't keep lists of the things that I should recommend.
Yeah.
Just kind of fly off the cuff on that. But send us some recommendations. We had a great time reading Billy 99. Again, really, it was a book that none of us had heard of. So
Yeah.
it was.
And apparently Tim Sale is very frustrated with.
It was interesting to talk to him about that book. Go listen to Back Matter number 3 if you haven't yet.
Cross promotion. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So we will see you guys next time.
Yeah.
And then,
We love you.
Yeah, and read Annihilation.
I have strictly platonic feelings for all of you.
Yeah.
I have. Yeah, I do.
And if you're listening from Sweden, let me know when the Comic-Cons are.
And send us meatballs.
I'll be
Send
there.
us meatballs.
That might be offensive to their culture, Toby.
No, that's a thing.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Send us Minecraft
Bye, everybody.
That is my
cards. I don't know.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Me From the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title, but like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.